I'm sitting on a 30-year-old wooden bench in the middle of the woods with nobody in sight, ranting into my laptop. And it seems like an appropriate topic. The fact that so many people's quote-unquote philosophy when it comes to politics is based on an already set of existing arrangements and facilities and infrastructure and wealth and everything else. And it all the way doesn't mean anything if you go back to what we started with, which is, people on the land, like where I am right now. People in the woods, or people on the plains, or people are wherever the heck people is. Right here, if some communist shows up and says, oh, the people should own the means of production, like right here, that doesn't mean anything. Like, we're in the middle of the woods. What the hell is the means of production? Like, your terminology doesn't mean anything unless you're already in a setting where there are factories and stuff. And if you look back at the history of this country, and actually I like the Little House books because they give a first-hand account of people just finding a place in the middle of nowhere and then building a town from scratch when they didn't have all the technology and they didn't have all the transportation. And yet, sometimes that involved like having the government violently chase away people who are already living there, the Indians, and that's, obviously evil and bogus and stuff. But still, people just go, well, we're going to seek our fortunes, or not even our fortunes, we're just going to see if we can go live in the middle of freaking nowhere, and they just head west. And they just wander off into the woods and go, oh, this place looks cool, should we live here? And there's all the way nothing there. Like, they start from all the way zero. So there's no factories to tax, there's nobody thinks of any of that because they start all the way at scratch. And they're like, okay, we kind of need a shelter so we don't die, and food would be nice. A water source is pretty dang important. We need that pretty dang soon or we die. You can hear a stream in the background. That's my water source at the very moment. But all of the, convoluted, weird, statist philosophies all the way don't make any sense. They don't mean anything in the setting that humanity always starts from. When human beings get to a new place where there haven't been human beings before, all of that stuff is meaningless. Like, okay, we're just people standing here looking around. We have nothing. We don't have buildings. We don't have electricity. What can we make? And the thing is, even the terminology we have for, laissez-faire capitalism and free market Austrian economics and blah, 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 like, those words and those terms are unnecessary for the people in those situations because they just kind of instinctively understand it. Like, okay, I worked all day finding some logs and chopping them up. Like, I brought an axe along, and that was all my worldly possessions heading west. And out in the middle of the woods, and they hacked out a bunch of things, and they put them together and built a little hut. And it took me days to build this little shelter. And now it'll keep the animals out, it'll keep the rain out, it'll keep all that out. And they didn't need to know the concept of homesteading to know that it's my freaking shelter. I built it. And if somebody else comes along and says, well, I need a shelter, so I'm just going to take yours, everybody says, screw you, you didn't build it, it's not yours. And they didn't need to know the concept of homesteading, and they didn't need to be able to rationalize it. It was just really damn obvious. And it's an extension of, I'm me. Really, the concept of self-ownership is just sort of another way of saying, I'm me, you're not me, and I don't belong to you. I'm my own weird sentient thing, and I make my own decisions. And we can trade and we can cooperate, and we could do a thing like, well, I'll help you build a shelter if you help me build one. And so all the things that have to do with homesteading and property rights and trade and all that are they're so obvious. They're self-evident. It's what people naturally would do in that setting. And you could take it to whatever ridiculous degree you want. Okay, we have 10 people wandering through the woods saying, where should we live? And somebody says, I have a right to affordable health care. Like, what the hell do you think that means in the middle of the frickin' woods? Do you see anyone here to give you affordable health care? You're just a person in the middle of the woods. You're entitled to exactly nothing. Like, the only right you have is for the other 9 of us to not beat the crap out of you for no good reason, or steal your stuff, or attack you. That's all. And the collectivists are so freaking clueless about this that now they're like, but I need a job to survive, so the mean, nasty employers have to give it to me because I'm forced to have a job. And the thing is, there's a little bit of truth to that, but it's a result of government, not the businesses. It's the result of government saying, well, we own all the land, so if you just wander into the woods and build a shelter, we're going to say, oh, no, that's our land. You have to buy it from us or pay property tax or everything else. But it's not a business saying you can't wander off into the woods. Like, the businesses don't claim to own the whole freaking planet. Government does. And says wherever you go, you have to, now you have these zoning laws. And imagine how stupid all of that stuff would be back when it's just, people headed west or, they're off in the woods. Okay, this looks like a place to live. And maybe it's 20 or 30 people that say, well, should we build a little town, or build our shelters in close enough proximity that we can help ourselves out and, trade and cooperate to, make, maybe we'll dig a well or whatever else. So they sort of make a town. They make an area where people are close enough to each other to cooperate. And imagine how just idiotic it would be for somebody to say, well, okay, but I have this 500-page document, and all of your dwellings have to be up to code before I'm going to let you live in them. Like, it would be ridiculous, and everybody would literally think the guy's insane if he said that. Well, you have to have outlets this many there, and you have to have a fire extinguisher, and it has to, shut up. We're in the middle of the woods. Are you out of your frickin' gourd? The only reason anybody puts up with that is after freedom achieves a certain level of prosperity, then along come the busybody bureaucrat parasites and say, well, now we're going to make sure everybody is above a certain standard. And they're not doing that for your benefit or for the benefit of society. They're doing that to control people and to get money because, gee, you have to pay for their permit to build something. And, again, imagine that, how ridiculous that would be, is 30 people wandering through the woods saying, maybe we should build a town here. And one of them says, you need my permission, and you have to give money for me to give you my permission for you to build a hut in the middle of the woods. Like, you're off your rocker, shut up. If you try to rob us and stop us from building a hut, we're just going to kill you because you're a violent loony. And if you actually think you're going to forcibly stop us from doing that, you're off your rocker. And so in a most basic setting like that, and that's why I like the island analogy, because the lunacy of all that crap is so obvious when it's a setting of, all right, we have a bunch of people and we have sort of a raw piece of the earth. We don't have skyscrapers, we don't have infrastructure, we don't have all the stuff that's easy to control and regulate and tax and demand licenses for this and a permit for that and all that crap. It's just people and nature. And this is how it all started. Like, it's not like people showed up and there were already, skyscrapers. People freaking built them. And they weren't there to begin with. And so to have a quote-unquote philosophy that all the way means nothing until there's a bunch of prosperity shows that the philosophy is bullshit. Voluntarism and non-aggression, they apply everywhere equally. It makes perfect sense on every scale to every degree. If there's 10 people wandering through the woods where nobody's ever been before, yeah, don't steal the other guy's stuff. What he builds is his, and don't attack people. Like, okay, that's not complicated. All right, now put it in the setting of a gigantic city, with this bustling, complex economy and communications and all this technology. And the principle is still, yeah, don't attack people and don't steal what's theirs and don't be a bastard. Like, they're principles. They apply all over the place. You don't have to, reach a certain amount of something or other before that applies. Like, you have to have 2 people in the same general area, and then it applies. In fact, in one person, you can apply it, but there's nobody to apply it to. Like, okay, you shouldn't attack somebody else. Well, that's easy enough to abide by. There isn't somebody else. There's just me. Like, it still doesn't require any magic special rituals or anything. And so the fact that all political mythology requires an existing level of civilization and economy and trade and stuff to mean anything is a dead giveaway that it's not based on principles. Like, in the middle of the woods, it all the way doesn't mean anything. And anybody who suggested it really would be seen as insane. Like on the island example, where, I did the Escaping the Myth events, and I'm going to use this for the mirror too, where if you actually suggest, well, I think I should be in charge, and I get to tell everyone what to do, and I can make up any rules I want, and if you disobey me, I get to hurt you. And people don't just say, no, I don't want to do that. They laugh because it's so freaking stupid. They don't just think it's a bad idea, they think it's insane, because it is. But if you start with a complex setting and a complex situation, suddenly people fall for the most asinine, convoluted excuses for violence. One being the means of production. Well, the people have the right to the means of production. Like, imagine some people in the woods starting a little town. At what point does that mean anything? Like, okay, we did this, and we found 2 big rocks, and we carved them, and we made a thing for grinding wheat. Yeah, well, now we can make wheat. And, like, okay, the people who made the thing own it. And somebody else says, no, I have the right to the means of production. That's how you make edible wheat, so it's mine. And everybody else there would say, you're insane. You didn't do anything. You didn't contribute anything to it. Why would it just magically be yours just because you want food? That's so stupid. I mean, communism is just a profoundly idiotic philosophy. And if you break it down to the simple things, that becomes obvious, which is why communists hate it when I break it down to the simple things and do a scenario like, all right, you and I are on an island, you build a shelter, and I don't, or the other way around. Now, does the guy who needs a shelter but sat on his ass all day, does he have the same claim, the same right to use the shelter as the guy who spent the whole day building it? And they wiggle and squirm, and none of them want to say yes because it sounds insane, but none of them want to say no because to say no is to acknowledge private property and to dismiss communism, because communism says to each according to his need. I need a shelter. Well, then go frickin' build one, you dumbass. And so there has to be the existing complicated stuff to make convoluted enough excuses to pretend that communism makes any sense, when it just totally obviously doesn't. And I think people who are more, more in tune with nature, ranchers and people who live in the woods and are used, and farmers, people who are used to dealing with, I'm starting from scratch. I'm a guy on some dirt, and we got to do something to survive. And you don't necessarily have to be self-sufficient, but you have to make something that somebody else wants to trade with, and notice that none of them who start out that way are ever communists, because it doesn't make any sense. Now, they might share, and if they have, if they create abundance, they share a lot to the point where they don't particularly care about who owns which, ear of corn, because they just say, well, I don't care, because there's tons of it, so, have at it. And you can see that all over the place where farms are doing well and there's that kind of culture. Well, they'll just share stuff. The stranger can show up and they'll just feed them. They'll give them free food. And socialists will say, well, see, that's socialism. Bullshit. It's their choice whether to share. That means it's capitalism. It's property rights. It's self-ownership and laissez-faire capitalism, even if none of them have ever heard of those terms and haven't bothered to think in those terms. And so it's, when your philosophy requires a complicated as hell scenario to make it sound at all plausible and at all justified, it's because your philosophy sucks. Like, if your philosophy doesn't apply to 2 people wandering in the woods, if it can't handle that, why the hell would you think it can handle the whole world? And I've had communists say exactly that when I do the island scenario. It's like, well, okay, you build a hut and I didn't. Do you own it? Owning just means you have the exclusive right to decide what's done with it. You built the thing. Do you get to decide who gets to use it? And they'll say, well, I would share. Okay, well, would it be your choice whether to share or not? Because if it's your choice whether to share or not, that's still private property. Yeah, you're being nice, but you still believe in private property. If you don't think I have the equal right to say, yeah, get out, I need a shelter, so you get out. I don't care that you built it. I need it. And but it's funny because I've had communists complain, oh, that scenario is too simple. Like, if you can handle the most simple, basic scenario in the world, like two people want one thing, how do you decide who gets to decide what's done with that one thing? There's either private property or there's communism, and communism is already a mess when you have two people and one thing. So they flounder around in that scenario, but then somehow claim that, well, if you're talking about 8 billion people deciding what to do with all the resources on the planet, then suddenly it'll work fine. Like, we can answer questions about that. But two people who want one thing, no, that's too complicated. You just don't understand. You just don't understand, and we're going to run away now. Because in the most basic, simple scenario, they can't say how their philosophy applies. Because they either sound utterly insane by giving the communist answer, which is, yeah, the guy who needs the shelter is entitled to it. The guy who just spent days building it, yeah, shit out of luck. Like, the other guy needs it, so he's allowed to steal it from you because it's rightfully his because he needs it. Whereas the non-aggression principle and the homesteading and the libertarian viewpoint is really simple. Like, the guy who built it owns it. It's his. Oh, and incidentally, a pet peeve of mine is the people who say, the American Indians, and they say this to some other cultures too, they don't believe in ownership. Bullshit. They absolutely do believe in ownership. If you doubt it, watch one make something, a bow or a lean-to or something, and then take it from him. And see if he goes, oh, okay, it wasn't mine just because I made it. Or see if he goes, what the hell are you doing? That was mine. And he may not call it property, they may not use that term, but they obviously believe that what I make is mine. Now, when it comes to land ownership, they don't usually think in those terms because if you're a migratory people, it doesn't make any sense. Like, this is my piece of land, and now I'm just going to walk away. Like, of what use is it to fight over whether that's yours or not? And how would you enforce it, and how would you even tell anybody else it was yours? So if you're hunter-gatherers, my land doesn't really mean anything. There's like my hunting territory, and they did believe in that. And if somebody else came along and was hunting in their territory, they'd say, wait a minute, this is where we get our food, and now you're coming in and eating the deer or the buffalo or the whatever that we hunt. So now we sort of have a problem. And they may be, vague and imprecise in exactly what they claim is their territory, and like, they don't do ownership with deeds and specific lines, but they still are like, I'm living here. You don't get to just come in and live here just for the heck of it. We're here already, so go away. So the idea that anybody doesn't believe in ownership is totally bogus, including communists who say, I don't believe in property. Really? So if I walked up and grabbed the computer out from in front of you and walked away with it, you'd be like, oh, well, it wasn't mine. Bullshit. You absolutely believe in property. All ownership means, like I just said, is that you have the exclusive right to decide what is done with something. Everybody believes in that. Even if it's something as simple as, I picked an apple off a tree and I'm about to take a bite of it. If somebody grabs it away from you, you're going to go, hey, that was mine, because of the massive effort you put in to pick it off the tree. And you can see it, too, that, in the little communes that people attempt, then they get all bitter, because I worked hard for that and you took it. So, okay, so you do believe in property, you just pretend you don't. Imagine no possessions. Imagine you're an idiot who hasn't thought things out and doesn't realize that everybody in the world believes in possessions. I mean, even freaking animals believe in possessions. A hawk just killed a rabbit. If some other hawk comes by, it's not going to go, oh, it's not mine. Like, there's nothing philosophical about it in the case of the hawk, but it's like, I got this. It's mine. I'm going to defend it. And so non-aggression is just recognizing that, okay, if that guy over there built something or caught something, or, he made use of a resource that nobody else was using, then it becomes his. I don't get to just go steal it from him. And everybody understands that, and everybody believes in that, including communists. So there isn't anybody who doesn't believe in private property. There are people who say, well, the land can't be owned, and that gets into the concept of homesteading, and I've had that argument with a few people recently. People can't own land. Okay, well then I want to use the land that your living room is on right now. Please move your living room. You can own your living room according to you, but according to you, you don't own the land. According to me, you do own it, but you just said you don't, so get off my land. Get off the people's land, move your living room, it's in my way. Obviously, to own the living room necessarily means to own the land it's sitting on, since ownership means you have the exclusive right to decide what's done with it. Right now, your living room is on it, which means you have the exclusive right to decide what's done on top of that piece of ground because your living room is there. And it's the same if you plant a garden or you plant crops or whatever else. It's like, hey, I did that. It can't be separated from the ground it's on, which means I have to, quote unquote, own the land, or the ownership of the fruits of my labor doesn't make any sense. Well, you can own the garden, but you have to take it out of the land it's in. Like, that's called killing my garden. So whenever there's a philosophy that they have to lie about, and they have to complicate things, like simple scenarios make them freak out and have tantrums and run away. You just don't understand. Here, read these 53 books. Really? If I read 53 books, I'll know how two people should deal with, two people who want one thing should deal with the problem under communism. Because it's really damn easy in a free market in the vast majority of cases. Oh, you made that? Then it's yours. Like, my need doesn't give me a claim to anything. Now I can do something else. We can share it. We can trade it, whatever. But I recognize it as yours, so it's your choice. It's a really easy solution. And as the situation gets more complicated, the solution stays easy. Like, all right, well, now I have really complicated stuff, and I do complicated trades with other people in a big complicated network. But it's still just, I know what's mine and what's yours. And the idea that it's progressive and enlightened to not believe in ownership is just stupid. It's always a lie. Everybody believes in ownership. If you doubt it, go find a commie, and when he's about to eat lunch, take his lunch away. And suddenly, he'll behave exactly as if he thinks that was his lunch, as if he owns it. Because he does, but he pretends not to, and makes up these weird, convoluted excuses. So it's, anyway, to get back to the original point, I think just, being in the woods in the middle of nowhere and thinking back to when this is what people had. They were just people wandering into this area going, all right, what are we going to do here? Now, of course, first there were the Indians who did it, and they lived here, and they were pretty good at that. Like, their technology isn't at all what we have, but they survived, and they got along. Yeah, they fought each other. I'm not going to do the thing of pretending, oh, it's just a lovey-dovey utopia. There are a bunch of different nations and different people, and, people are people, and some are assholes and some are nice. And so there was some violence and there was some cooperation, and, just like there is now. Basically, what Whitey did when he came along is bring along technology that made people a lot more efficient at being nasty to each other. Firearms being one example. But the general equation doesn't really change. And if you look in that setting of, all right, here's some people on the earth, like how everything starts. The philosophy is so freaking self-evident and obvious that everybody's an anarchist, which is why I like to use the island analogy. And as things get more complicated, the principles don't change. And the, right and wrong don't change, and how people should treat each other doesn't change. Like, yeah, the trade and the economics and the technology gets more complicated, but so what? We're still us. We still own ourselves. The principles still apply just fine. And it's one thing I like about being in nature is nobody denies that in nature. Even communists, wouldn't even pretend to believe the crap they believe, because it would sound so stupid to everybody else, including themselves. It would sound utterly insane to spew what communists say in the context of, there's 100 people that just got stranded on this island. And so it's just, getting back to the basics. It's sort of the thing of, whenever somebody has to make a ridiculously convoluted argument to make their case, then their position is probably BS. Which brings to mind the people arguing about resource-based economics and the Venus Project. And when when people like me point out the things ridiculous about it, the usual response is, you just don't understand it. You have to research it for years to understand it because it's really damn complicated. And to me, that's just a dead giveaway that they're full of crap. Like, yeah, there are ways things can get complicated, but if you don't have basic principles and underlying foundation to start with, you're just randomly making up crap. Like, yeah, there are, like I've talked about a bunch of them, there are a bunch of gray areas that, well, okay, homesteading, how do you, like, if I build a shelter over here and you built one over there and we both notice there's a stream halfway in between, and you want to make it into a pond and I want it to stay a stream for some reason, and we go, oh, well, what are we going to do about this? There can still be complicated issues, but you start with the basics that deal with most of the scenarios and issues, and then beyond that, you just try not to be assholes. You try to figure things out in a peaceful way. But if you start with a quote-unquote philosophy that's so complicated that you can't even explain how it applies in such a simple scenario, you're just making crap up. There's all the way nothing to it. It's just a convoluted excuse to whine for free stuff, basically. And socialism is that way. I mean, imagine Bernie Sanders and a group of 30 people walking through the woods deciding where to live. How the hell would you apply any of the crap that he spews? Well, people are entitled to free college. Like, you're a lunatic. There's no college here. There's people in the woods. Shut up, you loony. And so, yeah, so sometimes getting back to basics can make it easier to see through the BS than when you're involved in a hugely complicated, like, well, the means of production have to be owned by the people and the blah, 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 and done for the good, not of the profits of the corporations, blah, 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 blah. And you break it down to the simple things where they suddenly flounder and can't even explain what they believe. It's because they don't know what they believe in, because what they believe is crap. And it's really just, well, we want to steal stuff, so we're going to make up terms to make stealing stuff sound good. Socialism and the common good and sharing and blah, blah, blah. Just shut up. So yeah, it's fun to be in the woods because this is anarchy.